Hi guys, welcome to Acquiring Movement Skills, screencast on memory and sports performance. So your next topic or your last lesson of the week for all groups is going to be on memory. Now the key thing we have to look at here is how do we use our memory to perform sports skills. So when you're actually playing in a game, you might not realise it, but subconsciously you're using your memory in order to perform key skills. Now what we have to understand is this isn't a case of how you remember, it's how you use your memory to actually perform skills in a split second. Okay, so what happens then, I'm going to go through a way, there is a model used to explain this process of using memory to perform skills. So what we have to do then, the memory model is called the multi-store model of memory, okay, as up here, and basically within this you need to have certain key bits of information. So first things first, there are three stages to this model. So the first stage is a short-term sensory store. On the top one here, that has each kind of part of the model, so each of the three sections, you have to do certain things in the exam. For example, you would have to name each stage, you would have to give two characteristics that would dictate how long the information is stored there, and secondly, how much information can be stored there, and then we have to decipher it or describe the actual function of that phase of the model. Three phases then. First one, short-term sensory store. Following that, you have the short-term memory. Following that, you have the long-term memory. And as you can see in the middle, there is a kind of a link to go from one part of the memory model to the next. And by the end of it, that leads us to this point here where you come back to the short-term memory, which is responsible for performing a skill. So, you're standing there in a cricket field, rounders field, as we used for the example last time. How is your memory used then, and what are the components of memory? How is it used to perform a sports skill? So first thing then, short-term sensory store is the first thing, the first part of your memory that can be used. So what we have to do then is say how long can information be stored there? Well, you can store information in the short-term sensory store for 1 second, okay, and you can also store unlimited amount of information. So it's a really quick process with loads of stuff. So you're seeing all the input data from the display. So you're talking about this environmental stimuli. There's loads of stuff. Very quickly, the function of this short-term sensory store is to filter the important information using a process called selective attention, which is basically described as filtering. So what we do then, so from that, if we remember what we did before and we looked at kind of crowd, opposition, there might be other people on the field, loads of stuff. Suddenly, you filter the relevant information, and that is then, so you use selective attention, the information is then passed into your short-term memory. So you're now basically thinking about, right, the information that goes into our short-term memory, we can store, when we receive this information, 5 to 9 pieces of information. So it goes from unlimited, and we filter the key bits of information we need. 5 to 9 pieces of information, and we can keep it there for 30 seconds. So in this period, there are your characteristics. How do we describe what it does? So in order for us to be able to hold 5 to 9 pieces of information, our short-term memory has a role of chunking information, and what this means is it groups information together. So you might group together height, speed of the ball as one piece of information, so it doesn't count as one separate piece of memory. You've got two things together. Okay, so you kind of chunk it together, and the key thing that happens in this short-term memory is that we compare the information that has just come in, this 5 to 9 pieces of information, to information that we already have stored in the long-term memory here. Okay, once we've done that, so in order to do that, for that comparison to happen, we then encode key information into our long-term memory. Now, how much information can we put into the long-term memory? We can put unlimited information, and it can be stored, if you change this slightly, so it can be stored for permanently. Okay, so it can be there for life as long as you keep practicing the skill. For example, you probably can still ride a bike now because you practiced it so much when you were younger. You can go back on a bike and you're not going to fall off. So basically, you have this information there. Now, the key process or the key function behind the long-term memory is basically the information stored, okay, is recognized and then retrieved. So if you imagine now, you have the information, you've compared the information from the short-term memory into the long-term memory, information is recognised and then retrieved. So for example, I'll go back to do the examples in a second. You retrieve the information, it goes to your short-term memory, and the short-term memory is responsible for performing a skill. So that is your kind of key bits of information. Ultimately, we are saying that you have to, in order to perform a sports skill, you go through three processes and three parts of your memory. You start off with unlimited information for 1 second, lots of stuff. Ball, it might be opposition, teammates, crowd, all this stuff. Then what we have to do, the key focus of this short-term sensory storage, in that second, very quickly, you filter the information you need. You do this, so for example, we're talking about catch here in cricket, so selectively attend, you filter the relevant information into the short-term memory using that. Short-term memory, keep it in there for 30 seconds, 5 to 9 pieces of information, info that we have in our short-term memories compared to the long-term memory. That's the key focus. In order to get it into our long-term memory to actually do this kind of recognition, we actually then encode it. So it has to pass from there to encode. Then, when we get to the long-term memory, we are basically going to do the following. So, I've said to you on this bit here, what we would do then, if you imagine this into a sporting term, you are there in a field, you are waiting for a catch to come. You filter, stage one, the ball. Okay, what you do quickly when you're assessing the height and flight of the ball, what will happen there, you compare the flight of the ball that is coming towards your hands to any catches or that you have already stored in your long-term memory, because your brain is like a computer. Your long-term memory will have all the different motor programs of catches that you've done before. And what happens is, if you can recognize the flight path that you've got here, so the new information, it's recognised into your long-term memory. The long-term memory's role then is to retrieve the catch motor program to the short-term memory, and from there the skill is performed, e.g. you catch the ball. So when you come into the lesson, what I really need from you, your Cornell notes should basically be under the headings: short-term sensory store, short-term memory, long-term memory. Now, you need to have 4 key things for each stage. Characteristic of how long the information can be stored, characteristic for how much information can be stored, a descriptive sentence, and finally, what allows the information to be passed from this part of the model into the next one. Okay, we'll have a look at the example a little bit more in the lesson. If you can make Cornell notes on those, please, making sure you have a heading, multi-store model of memory, and then you have 3 subheadings: short-term sensory store, short-term memory, long-term memory. Your aim is to get questions, and these questions need to be good, and they need to be detailed, and you need to spend time on this because it's a really important lesson for the summer exam. I'm planning this as a 10-mark question, so please make sure you do this effectively, and your notes, you've got plenty of time to do them. Make sure your notes are good. Okay, thank you.